When Democrats went to caucus, we had dispensed with all amendments, and we're on discussion on House File 639. Do any senators seek the floor on House File 639? Seeing none, the chair recognizes the senator from Senator Busolo. Excuse me, the chair recognizes the senator from Winneshiek, Senator Klimisch.
The bill still, right?
We are on the bill.
Would Senator Alon's yield?
Senator Alon's, will you yield?
I will.
Senator Klimisch, you're in order.
I've got some questions for you, Senator Alon's. You heard me allude to them earlier on when we were talking about running Senator Busolo's amendment. So can you explain to me the definition of common carrier in 639 and exactly what that's aimed to do?
Well, common carrier is, I'm not just going to summarize, but it is making sure that an entity that is going to, in this case, a pipeline that's going to transport and qualify or request permission to use eminent domain is going to meet the criteria. That is going to be, it's going to, I don't have it memorized, so.
So can you specifically speak to the clear and convincing evidence standard that you guys have inserted in the definition of common carrier? And then can you also talk to why there's also another definition for common carrier associated later on in the bill, specifically dealing with HLPs under 479B, while the first definition of common carrier is under 6A.21. So it almost appears that you're going to have conflicting definitions of common carrier occur within this piece of legislation. How do we parse that out internally at the IUC when they're reviewing what this does to current code sections?
Well, the first section is in 6A, so it deals with eminent domain in general. And you had made a reference earlier that implied that there were two different standards. So it is a raised standard of clear and convincing evidence. The second reference in 479B is basically a linkage back to 6A. So there was this question of two different standards, and I think the second section really clarifies that and ties the two together.
But it's entirely possible that you have two different endings to the same question being asked. You're asking it twice. It seems redundant. Why is the redundancy built in?
Well, again, I did the linkage between the two, just to ensure that common carrier is part of the requirement.
Okay, we'll move on. So going on to the judicial review component that affects, I believe it's section 2, that affects section 6A.24, it talks there again about having the burden of establishing by clear and convincing evidence. But earlier on in that code section, when the definition is established for public use, public good, public purpose, there's no clear and convincing evidentiary standard there. So you have put that evidentiary standard in the judicial review process, which is going to elevate the IUC's ruling to a higher level of review in the courts. Why didn't you balance those out? It seems to me like you are stacking the deck specifically to bog these cases down and slow down the progress of us building infrastructure across the state of Iowa.
I didn't write the bill, obviously, but again, I would say that
it's your bill.
You have to read the question again. Say, I'm sorry.
The question is, you have set up under the judicial review portion of 6A an elevated standard utilizing clear and convincing evidence to establish whether it means public purpose, public use, or public improvement. Earlier in that code section, there's a section that deals with establishing that definition. I can reference it if you want me to, but in that definition, or in that section of code, it doesn't have the same evidentiary standard that it does in the judicial review component. So what that means is, when the company's before the IUC presenting their case, they have to meet A and B. When that case, when the IUC's done with it, they issue their ruling, and it's challenged in court, now the company has to meet A, B, and C. And so C is brought into this conversation brand new, specifically on the review portion, not on the initial portion of the hearing conducted at the IUC. That seems to me to be intentionally designed to bog down the system and put any hazardous liquid pipeline company, right, or even transmission companies potentially at risk for having to provide a higher evidentiary standard upon review than they did with the initial hearings with the IUC. Because again, just not talking about CO2 pipelines with my question, Senator. I'm simply trying to ascertain what the overflow or the overspray is on this bill, and it seems pretty significant to me. So I'd like to try to get an answer to that question.
6A is the overarching eminent domain section, and 479B is the section that deals specifically with hazardous pipelines. So I guess my view is that the language dealing with 479B and that the IUC now would be beholden to or would have to adhere to is overarching in 6A. So I guess I have nothing further to add on that. But
Yeah, I mean, again, the section that defines common use, public purpose, public improvement is 6A22. So it's in the same code section. So I'm curious why we just put a heightened evidentiary standard on the review process in the courts that we didn't attach to the IUC process up front into making that determination themselves. It seems to me like it's lopsided, Senator. It seems to me like this is designed to bog the system down, to give appeals processes working against companies that are trying to build infrastructure in this state a huge disadvantage. I appreciate the fact that, let's move on. So, moving on to the section about the interveners, right? I mentioned that before. So your subsection reads, the following persons are entitled as a right to intervene in any proceeding conducted by the commission. A member of the General Assembly. Senator, which General Assembly did you mean in that bill?
I think obviously that would indicate the current General Assembly.
What's that, Senator Alonso? I'm sorry.
I believe it would indicate the current General Assembly.
The current one? I'm sorry. Again, Senator, I apologize. I didn't catch the end of that. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just really didn't.
Oh.
So again, I'll ask the question again. Which General Assembly did you intend to allow the right of intervention? And we can move on. So which county elected or city officials did you intend to allow the right of intervention? Inside the state, outside the state? I mean, because it's wide open. I would think if we're going to craft a piece of legislation that's going to have such overarching concerns regarding way more again than CO2 pipelines, we would want to make sure that we're not going to put all the other utilities we build in the state at a disadvantage. Well, let's move on. So any resident with a minimally plausible interest, how do you define minimally plausible interest?
It's basically a little bit more restrictive definition than what is in the rules already in place for the IUC. Okay. There it basically just says has an interest.
Okay, and then I'm going to go back to my earlier question of residents of where? Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, South Dakota. Where do we draw the line? Because the bill doesn't specify. So this bill could be interpreted by the IUC. If I happen to come down from Minnesota and want to file as an intervener, nothing would prohibit me from doing that. I mean, is that the intention really, to bog this system down with interveners from any place or anywhere, any elected official, any city council or county official, or any resident with a plausible interest in the proceedings? I'll move on. This section I really have some questions on. This is the insurance section. I mentioned this earlier, right? And again, I'm really trying to talk to this bill not through the specific lens of CO2 pipelines, Senator. I really am not. I'm simply trying to look at, what other unintended consequences this potentially has for companies trying to do business in Iowa, and with this section specifically, for the impact of that to the ratepayer. So we know this is an insurance deal. I'm still asking questions yet. So looking at B, any injury including diminution of value of real property. How do we establish that? Do you intend for the IUC to build rules around that? Do you intend to have legal challenges, question and establish how we ascertain how my value has been diminished based off the construction of the pipelines? I'm not a lawyer. I mean, I've been a printer my whole life, so I'm asking these questions to help educate myself as well, Senator.
Well, the clause at the end of the section says due to the presence or construction of the pipeline, and it's talking about insurance policy, so it's something that would be delineated by the insurance carrier.
I'm narrowing in on B again, going back to my question. How do I establish the diminution of value? What's the process for that? How do you anticipate the process being fleshed out? Because you're brushing in broad strokes there. I just want to make sure I understand what this looks like at the end of the day.
I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to answer that question.
Okay. So then, let's move on to C. The inability for a person to obtain insurance, or the increased cost for a person to obtain and renew insurance. So what's the standard there? I mean, if my insurance premiums go up 20%, and I felt they should have gone up 10%, am I able to file a court case challenging that extra 10% insurance premium increase was a result of a pipeline? Again, more than just CO2 pipelines. The way this is structured, these insurance requirements will affect any hazardous liquid pipeline. And I can enumerate them again: oil, propane, heating oil. So I'm just curious, how do we establish that? What's the threshold? What's the metrics? And again, if it's not in the bill.
One of the thresholds is that obviously filing a lawsuit frivolously based on some spurious charge would be something that would subject you to cost to litigate.
Run that past me again, Senator, please.
You can't just file a frivolous lawsuit. You're implying that people will just file a frivolous lawsuit based on some.
Does it say in this section that I can't file a frivolous lawsuit to challenge whether or not I've lost value in my home, or to challenge whether or not my insurance premiums went up unjustly related to a pipeline without having a clear definition or any sort of base metrics to apply to those standards? I mean, you're putting this back in the hands of the court is what you're saying, right? This is going to be a court case to challenge whether or not my insurance premiums went up or my value of my property or home went down, right? I mean, that's how we see this playing out, because the bill doesn't define it very clearly. So somebody else is going to have to define this, correct?
I could read you the section there again, based on rules that are in place already for the IUC. So this is basically codifying rules that there are landowners who have concerns and have run into issues with already securing insurance.
Okay, Senator. So, I mean, given that, right? So let's say we pass the bill. We put in place these enhanced insurance standards. Do you know how this stacks up compared to other states and other policies that are passed by states governing this sort of insurance structure? Do you know how that stacks up?
No.
You don't. So, okay, understanding, there's 50 of them. They all have different policies. Is it reasonable for us to say that these things will cost the pipeline companies more money to achieve and maintain this level of insurance? I mean, I can see the reasonableness in that, because you've put a whole bunch of standards on them that we haven't clearly defined. We haven't fleshed out how we're going to define those. So here I am, a company wanting to do business in Iowa, looking through this section saying, boy, this is going to cost me some bucks because I'm going to have to defend all these things because this bill is not very well written. So is it safe to say that at the end of the day, when a company, let's say, hypothetically, runs into something that increases their costs, that cost ends up being passed along to the end consumer?
If a person that's affected by the pipeline has increased insurance costs, they obviously, just like, again, the IUC rules say they have to be made whole. Again, it's a codification of what's already in the rules. So
Senator, no offense, you're not answering my question. I'm simply saying, is it reasonable for us to assume, which I believe it is, because we see this happen all the time. I hear about it in this chamber all the time. Cost drivers, cost increases that are based off decisions we make here in this chamber. And this is one of those decisions, Senator. This is one of those decisions that is going to affect pipeline companies, again, far beyond CO2 pipeline companies, and place this onerous burden on them to ascertain and achieve this coverage. And again, we don't know what levels or metrics or who makes the determination, but in court. So it's safe to say that at the end of the day, whatever this costs them to add will be passed along to the consumer. I mean, who else is going to pay for it?
So the implication is that the pipeline is going to raise insurance costs for lots of people, and somebody has to pay for it.
Let's move on to my last question. I know it's getting late, and we're approaching, yeah, it's getting late. So I want to drill down on section 17, and you and I have had talked about this an awful lot. This is the section that gives me probably one of the greatest levels of pause. This act applies to condemnation proceedings for which the application filed under section 6B3 is filed on or after the effective date of this act. So, I mean, this is a common piece that I see resurfacing in a lot of bills. And I've had a lot of conversations on my concerns with this piece, right? The fact that where you're referencing it back to 6B3 deals with county condemnation proceedings, and the way this is structured upon the enactment date, it would be reasonable for me to assume that even though I've been granted the right of eminent domain, I haven't actually begun condemnation proceedings. So, at the end of the day, we pass this bill upon the enactment date, we move on. A pipeline company, again, outside of CO2, comes back and says, well, I'm ready to begin condemnation proceedings at a county level. And we look at the enactment date, and there's a legal challenge staring us in the face saying, you don't have that right any longer because of the way the bill is structured. And my concern is that, you know, there are contracts already issued on the Phase 1 pipeline. Anytime that Summit had entered into a voluntary easement, that's a contract between Summit and a property owner. And as part whole of the pipeline project and the permit that was issued to them currently under the existing law we have, they have the ability to utilize eminent domain. Decision right or wrong. I mean, we've been debating that all night, but that's the way it sits right now. So if they're unable to fulfill those condemnations at a local proceeding or a local level, it doesn't allow them to actually realize those contracts they've entered into, right? So that gets back to the Article 1, Section 10 concerns. And let's speak honestly, because I think we need to be honest tonight. So I've visited with you folks, I mean, my colleagues, and I've expressed this concern. And by the way, Senator, I'm done with the yielding, so I appreciate your time in answering my questions. I've expressed these concerns, and I say, you know, this will affect and impact the existing Phase 1 pipeline that has a permit already issued by the state of Iowa. And I'm concerned about putting the state of Iowa and our taxpayers at legal risk. And when I've talked about my concerns with this, certain members in the chamber are aware of those concerns. It doesn't seem to bother them. It bothers me. I mean, I have a responsibility to the taxpayers of the state to try to pass policy that's not going to put them at risk of writing a check to somebody because we make a bad decision. And at the end of the day, I want to make it clear, I'm going to vote no on this bill because this bill is stacked one bad decision after another bad decision after another bad decision with very loosely applied framework that we would scrutinize in any other situation but this one. We would look at this and say, this bill is full of holes. This bill sets up a whole avalanche of potential bad policy. While we were trying to squash a fly, we took a nuclear bomb to it. That's what we did, right? We had the ability to take a fly swatter. We took a nuclear bomb to it. And this is the bill, you know. Everybody knows now that my colleagues here sitting amongst us signed a pledge to run, right? And the Democrats, I believe on the other side of the aisle, see the concern in that. Hence, they just tried to do an end-run amendment around that bill and go back to a much simpler piece that removes all of these, what I would consider toxic, I would call them toxic portions that set the stage for Iowa to really, really have issues when we're doing any sort of project, any hazardous pipeline project. Again, apart from CO2, transmission projects, cost drivers that potentially will increase the cost to our ratepayers at the end of the day because we're putting standards on projects and companies outside of CO2 projects and companies that will come home to roost. And ultimately, at the end of the day, my biggest concern is this. We pass policy. We're all responsible in this chamber for the Iowa taxpayer. I hear it all the time, right? This bill puts us at risk, and a risk that I'm not comfortable with, and a risk that I can't support or vote for because we don't know the answer to the question. But yet we've set the table. We've set the table to have the question asked. And the simple act of asking the question puts us at risk for getting an answer that we don't want to hear. But at that point in time, we're going to hear that because that's all we have left. That's all we have left. Thank you, Madam President. I would encourage a no vote on 639.
Chair recognizes the senator from Sioux, Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I will say that those who were part of that group, I guess the 12 of us, who asked or insisted that leadership bring this bill to the floor for clean vote, were willing, after hearing all the criticism from our Republican colleagues, all of our other Republican colleagues, last Friday, to substitute HF943 for HF639, because the whole laundry list of criticisms were enunciated directly to us at that point. Later on in the day, we came forward and said, well, then let's just go with a simple, straightforward ban on CO2 pipeline eminent domain, 943. That was rejected out of hand. That was goalpost moving. And as a result of that, that option was set aside. So it makes me wonder if it wasn't really just any opposition to tampering with the Summit pipeline, rather than the particulars of the language of 639. I'll also say that we've heard a lot the last week or two, criticism of those of us who stepped forward after waiting 4 long sessions for leadership to do something, and they were willing to do nothing in terms of a floor vote and open floor debate. We were roundly criticized repeatedly because we've allied ourselves with the Sierra Club. And I gotta say, it's probably not all that surprising that members of the Sierra Club are opposed to this, not because of some, secret agenda to ban internal combustion engine cars. I think it's the fact that 80% of Iowans know this is wrong. So why wouldn't Democrats, 80% of them, be opposed to it? And about 72% of Republicans in our state, 80% of independents. They know that eminent domain does not fit here. Now, they may not be able to cite chapter and verse of the Constitution, but they know it's wrong. So yes, Democrats are also opposed to this. I don't think that it should impugn the motivations of us Republicans who also feel that way. I'm astounded that this isn't a unanimous vote by Republicans. Now, I know you have your reasons, and I can respect them. You may not respect the reasons that we support this bill, but I respect the reasons you oppose it. I can understand them, and to some extent, they're legitimate. But for me, I think about, what about all the groups that have backed our effort to try to provide some protection from harassment of the landowners by the company, try to provide some sort of guardrails to the IUC so when they come back for phase 2, they get direction, finally, from the Iowa legislature. I received yesterday an email from the Iowa Cattlemen's Association saying, we urge you to consider voting in favor of private property rights and opposing the use of eminent domain for private use. Iowa Cattlemen's Association, not environmental extremists, I wouldn't say. The Iowa Farm Bureau has been active in this in the last 2 sessions. 90% threshold bill and other measures that we have tried to bring forward, again, always killed without a public hearing at the subcommittee level. The Iowa Republican Party, and maybe it's quaint quoting this to my fellow Republicans, I get that impression sometimes, but the Iowa Republican Party platform, we oppose government using eminent domain to take private property away from the owner for the use of another private party or for-profit entity. What does that mean? Is that just something that it doesn't matter? I mean, I don't know. I'm taking the Republican position on this. The people who oppose this bill are not taking the Republican position on this. I don't know. I can't speak for the Democrats. I don't know what they're up to, but the Republican Party is clear, and I'm not going to apologize for that. I am representing my 60,000 constituents back in Sioux County, Lyon County, Plymouth County. I've heard from 2 people connected with the ethanol plant locally that don't like what I'm up to, and I've had dozens and dozens of people say, thank you, Jeff. Keep it up. And I will say, as far as the $1 billion lawsuit threat, the motto of our state is, our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. And I know some of you Republicans, my friends or former friends, you think of me as an idealist. And maybe I am. But, when it says our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain, there's not an asterisk there. It doesn't say, unless we're threatened by $1 billion lawsuit. I mean, what does that language mean? I'll just end by saying this, as much as I talk about the Constitution, as important as I think it is, because it's our rule book, there is also a moral and an ethical component to this fight, and it is a fight, obviously. I think of the story of Naboth's vineyard. And if you're not familiar with that, it's part of the Jewish scriptures, what Christians we would call the Old Testament, in 1 Kings chapter 21. And I would encourage those of you who are inspired by Scripture, want to be guided by Scripture, take a look at 1 Kings chapter 21, Naboth's vineyard, if you've forgotten what that story is all about. It's all about land and somebody with power and position seizing it from those who have less. I mean, this isn't just a fight about constitutional propriety and authority. It's also a fight about justice, and it's a fight about truth, and it's a fight about good government. And those things are worth fighting for. I think even if it puts you at odds with the majority of your partisan colleagues. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from Clinton, Senator Zimmer.
Thank you, colleagues. Well, I'm new here, but I do say this. I stand here as a U.S. citizen that has the privilege of living in Iowa. And I say that because I was moved by Senator Evans' opening comments a few weeks ago, really articulating what the Fifth Amendment is all about. And when I stood down there at the well, put my hand in the Bible and swore to that, I'm sorry, but that's first and foremost. It's black and white for me. That's where it stands. But I also want, and I take a little different approach to having someone else define me as a radical environmentalist. For those in this chamber that have lived through the farm crisis and not read about it in a history book, that was a major deal that took us 3 decades to recover from. We lost thousands of farms, family farms, because we did not have a market for our commodities. Our farmers were producing more and more, and we had no place for it to go. 2 things opened that market up. Ethanol production, because we are an inventive people. We came up with another alternative, a clean energy alternative that allowed us to produce our own energy in this state. This pipeline is absolutely necessary. You don't have to conflate the two. I can be for property rights and be for the pipeline. I can figure this out. We as Iowans need the pipeline. We need ethanol production, especially at a time when tariffs are threatening those markets that we took years to open up. And if the expectation is that we are supposed to consume all the commodities that our farmers produce, then this would be one of those that we have to have. I appreciated my colleagues opening up the possibility to talk about the amendment that was just defeated that addressed all of the concerns that Senator Klemesh just articulated. It took care of all of that. It was clean. It made it really, really simple. You can be for the pipeline. You can be for ethanol production. You can be for Iowa union workers putting that pipeline together and say, we can do this without having to use eminent domain. We can do 2 things. We can actually walk and chew gum. We can figure this out. Do we have to widen the corridor so that for people that do not want that coming across their ground, there's a workaround? Is that a possibility? We can figure this out without treading on other people's property rights. I'm ashamed that I have to sit there and put the Constitution by this bill that we have here, because that's what I'll put, knowing that we are on a razor's edge in this state because we produce so much and we're so good at it. We have got to have a place for it to go and use for it. And I'm not disagreeing, Senator Clement. You're right. This one really hamstring. That's why we brought the other one forward. And I am just flummoxed by the idea that you voted that down. It was clean. It was simple. It articulated to our property owners in this state, and it still allowed the pipeline to move forward. Shame on us.
Chair recognizes the senator from Wapello, Senator Westrich.
Thank you, Madam President, and my Senate colleagues. I feel that several things were said this evening that I just wanted to address, and I'll do it very briefly and simply, is that I'm representing my 60,000 some constituents, and I've, especially once I joined the group of 12 senators that signed on to a letter saying that we would vote for this bill and that we wanted to see and would demand a vote on this bill, I got nothing but positive support. I posted on Facebook repeatedly and got positive support back from my district. And I do believe that we're now addressing a few questions and concerns that could have been addressed when the House brought over, not unanimously, but there were a lot of House members, and I don't know the exact number, that voted for 639 and 943. 943, which was just not brought forward, at least to me. I don't think it made it out of committee. But 639 did make it out of committee. I think after 4 years of wanting something done, there could have been an earnest effort to correct the issues that have been brought forward in this discussion, rather than amendments that didn't address those things but piled onto them. That's my view. But I would ask, what is your price? We're saying that there's imminent lawsuits. That's lawsuit threats. That's speculation that there would be lawsuits and threats by the current company that is actually wanting to build this particular pipeline. What's your price to vote against the constitutional right to private property? This particular pipeline is a private for-profit project. What's the price you'll pay to protect the folks in the gallery and all across Iowa's private property rights? That's my question. And I'll be a yes on this bill. I've made that promise and that statement, and I'm going to honor that by being a yes. And thank you, Madam President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Bremer, Senator Salmon.
Thank you, Madam President. This bill requires stricter standards for the use of eminent domain, and this is very much needed, especially in the case of carbon capture pipelines, and that's why I support it. I have been contacted by many landowners and farmers, both in my district and all over the state, concerned and opposed with being threatened with eminent domain being imposed upon them and their land seized for an easement for a project that is for private use, not for public use. This is a violation of our private property rights as expressed in our constitutions and in Iowa law. Eminent domain should be used only for eminent domain should not be used for private use projects or economic development. Our constitutions only allow it for public use. This carbon capture pipeline is strictly a private use project. Private property rights affect every one of us, not just the landowners and farmers who have the misfortune of their land being in the way of the pipeline. If any one of us has his property rights damaged, we all have our property rights damaged. It may not be you today, but it could be you tomorrow. Our federal and state constitutions, particularly the Fifth Amendment in our Bill of Rights, require a respect for private property rights and provide a defense for landowners against those who are more powerful. The situation landowners are in right now is the exact situation in which our constitutions are intended to provide protection. It must be taken into consideration that the individual farmer and landowner has plans for their property, and they must be protected against the plans the private company has for their property. Iowa is an agricultural state, and our constitutional rights to private property must absolutely be protected if we expect our farmers and landowners to invest in their property. It is key not only to liberty, but also to prosperity. That is why the founders put it in there. A country that doesn't protect private property rights has neither liberty nor prosperity. That's why private property rights was so important to our founding fathers. Property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. The moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the law of God and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. That's from John Adams. We are so used to having our property rights protected as Americans, we don't know quite what it's like when we don't have them protected. It has taken quite a while for us to wake up to this critical danger. We have hundreds of farmers and landowners now threatened with a serious erosion of these fundamental rights. This is unprecedented in Iowa history. We have not seen the likes of this before in our state. We are at a true watershed moment where we risk losing our private property rights. We must remember it's not economic development first and Constitution second. It's Constitution first and economic development second. Our Declaration of Independence tells us government's primary job is to protect the rights of its people. That's what we are doing today with this bill, and I wholeheartedly support it and urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Walz.
Thank you, Madam President. After 4 years, we're finally having this debate. This is happening because of you. This is happening because a small group of citizens exercised their constitutional freedoms, their natural freedoms that are protected by our Constitution, to come to this State House and to lobby, to fight, to scrap for a hearing. I want to publicly thank my Democratic colleagues for sticking together, because if we had not stuck together, we would not be having this conversation. I want to thank my Republican colleagues who stuck together, because if they hadn't stuck together, we would not be having this conversation. We've been talking about this pipeline for 4 years now, 5 years. We've all gotten questions about the pipeline. Democratic senators have had our motives questioned on this floor. We've been impugned. And I want to thank my colleague, Senator Zimmer, for his comments a moment ago, because there are two distinct issues that have been conflated through a lot of the discussion around not just House File 639, but this entire debate. I think the reality is that our state is facing a potentially existential threat. We, as a state, we're 48th in personal income. We're 49th in GDP. We're staring down the barrel of changes ranging from technology to concentration in our agricultural economy that are threatening the sustainability of Iowa farms, changes that could very well destroy the corn market, and the effect that would have on Iowa corn growers and the small towns and rural communities, and frankly, the big cities, whose lifeblood is fundamentally driven by our ag economy, is hanging in the balance. That's why there are so many people in the majority who are trying to figure out a way to get this pipeline built. I think that's why there is an interest among a lot of people over here to get this pipeline built. Summit is not the only company that understands this. We've had, I think, 3 different pipeline companies pop up over the last few years. Summit's the last one standing. I don't think representatives from Summit would disagree with the assertion that they have handled this very poorly. I think many of them would acknowledge that their tactics were too aggressive, that they pushed too many of you, too hard, too fast, didn't give you the information that you wanted. When there's billions of dollars on the line, you're willing to do a lot. You can hire the best representation that you can buy. You can pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for voluntary easements. You can settle lawsuits. You can do a lot. You can't buy the Constitution. Fundamentally, what we are talking about here is the constitutional right to private property. That is what we are talking about. I remember some of the conversations that we had in the early days of this project. Jess, I see you up in the gallery. You've been working on this for a long time. Jan, see you. Some of you guys asked me, where are the Democrats on this? This is back in what, 22? 21? It's late I've got a 1-year-old, so I'm not sleeping super great. Even though I was born in the 90s, Senator Busolo. And what I'll tell you is this. I think there are a lot of people up here who are looking down the line, and you guys are really scared about the future of the ag economy in this state. That's why we had the renewable fuels people up here. That's why we had the corn growers up here. That's why we had just about every agricultural group that you can imagine trying to talk to folks about this deal. I think if you're going to build a pipeline, a carbon pipeline, the first core function has to be growing our ag economy. That's what it's for. Personally, I don't think it makes an ounce of sense for a carbon pipeline to move the sequestered carbon to a place where it can be used for enhanced oil recovery. Like, what are we even talking about? I think if you're going to build a project like this, it should be built with Iowa crews who understand that Iowa has the best soil in the world, and that if you're going to disrupt it, there are special things that need to happen. So, Senator Busolo, I do appreciate some of the work that went into the mitigation efforts. But most importantly, Madam President, I don't think that you should be using eminent domain for private gain. It is that simple. That's why I offered amendment, I think it was 3166, right? That's what you all want. That's what the Constitution protects, Madam President. It is a shame that we have found ourselves here after however many years, however much money, however many closed doors conversations, and this is where we are. Madam President, I'm going to vote for House File 639 tonight. I have a feeling that it's not the end of the conversation. I hope the next part of the conversation can be a little bit more respectful, can be a little bit more inclusive, and can be honest about the shortcomings that got us to where we are tonight, and that brings people together to address not just the problem that the pipeline is in fact trying to solve, but just to open up new markets without disrespecting the most important constitutional right that Iowa landowners have, which is their private property. Thank you, Madam President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Winneshiek, Senator Klimisch.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I apologize for rising a second time on this issue, but there's been some inconsistencies to my record that I really want to try to establish some clarity to. My questions, I never once mentioned that I was against private property rights. I never once mentioned that I thought private property rights were disposable. All I mentioned was the concerns on House File 639. Just those concerns, to make sure that we are doing our due diligence in this chamber to not let something loose that we don't want to try to catch later. And I think this is exactly what we're setting ourselves up for. I'd like to read a portion of this. I mean, this is public. I mean, this went public within 12 hours of being delivered to Senate leadership. I'm just going to key in on this piece. The following Iowa senators are committed to holding a vote for House File 639 as passed this session by the Iowa House. We believe addressing eminent domain is more important than the budget or any other priority for the 2025 session, and pledge to vote against any remaining budget bill until a floor vote occurs on a clean House File 639. Would Senator Evans yield?
Senator Evans, will you yield?
Certainly.
You're in order, Senator Klimisch.
Let's roll back the clock. About a week ago tomorrow, I think it's been, I sat in a room with all 12 of the senators that are listed on this sheet. Senator Lons, Senator Campbell, Senator DeWitt, Senator Evans, Senator Guth, Senator Lofgren, Senator Pike, Senator Rowley, Senator Salmon, Senator Sayers, Senator Taylor, and Senator Westridge. You were in that meeting, were you not, Senator?
Yes, I was.
At that meeting, did I not volunteer to work with you on 639?
Senator Klimisch, you have volunteered to work with us throughout this process.
And did I not offer you 943 at that meeting?
I believe you did.
I believe the answer is yes, Senator. Yeah. I did offer you 943. What was, thank you, Senator. I'm good. Thank you for yielding. And what I was told at that meeting was, nope, we don't want 943. We don't want to talk about amending 639. I'm going to read it again. And pledge to vote against any remaining budget bill until a floor vote occurs on a clean House File 639. I'm meeting your obligation today. You get a vote on a clean 639. And again, I want to go back to my previous comments, so they can't possibly be misconstrued to me being in favor of the unlawful taking of somebody's private property, because I never said that. I never said I was in favor of that. All I said was House File 639 is a pie that's baked with a whole ton of ingredients, and some of them are spoiled. And I don't think we want the Iowa residents to eat that pie. And that's what we're setting the table for. Not only for cost drivers and increases, but also for heightened standards that will be applied to not only a carbon sequestration pipeline. Again, I want to make this clear. I'm not talking about carbon sequestration pipelines. I'm talking about hazardous liquid pipelines, roughly 50,000 miles of them currently under the state of Iowa that exist. That will make that process more cumbersome and more expensive to the ratepayers and the end users. And I also want to talk about transmission lines. We have 2.5 tranches marching across this state, 2.5 of them. What's in 639 will make that process extremely more cumbersome, extremely slower. I think one thing we can all agree on in this chamber, because we've had robust conversations on it, is energy, right? I mean, energy is a need. You look at the potential load growth, I mean, they're predicting in the MISO market for us to see the equivalent increase of the state of Minnesota over the next 3 to 5 years. The state of Minnesota, right? And we are going to slow the process down to build transmission lines. We're going to bog it up in the system. We're going to tie it up in frivolous lawsuits and court challenges and unreasonable insurance expectations on the tops of these companies. And I expect it to have an impact on how the state of Iowa functions and our ability to do business. Energy drives everything. I mean, right? We can agree on that. And at the end of the day, again, if we add cost increases to the cost of business to do business in Iowa, that's going to get passed along to the consumer. So I want to cover this ground one more time and be really, really crystal clear. I never once said I was against private property rights. I never once said that the taking of private property was a good thing. I simply said House File 639 is a poor vehicle because it's loaded with policy that puts the state of Iowa at odds with companies that want to do business in the state, not just carbon sequestration pipeline companies. And it also puts at risk Iowa taxpayer dollars and Iowa's taxpayers' pocketbooks by paying increased costs for the components in this bill. You're right. Somebody mentioned we can do better. We can do better. I made the offer to do better a week ago, and yet I was turned down. So I think it's really important to have that perspective in this record, because in that week's time, we could have sat around and crafted probably, a much better piece of legislation. I think at that time, my concerns for 639 were still there. And I've heard a lot of talk, and I respect it, about the constitutional implications of taking land, private property rights. What I haven't heard is anybody answer my questions or concerns on House File 639 and how it affects the state of Iowa. Madam President, I appreciate you letting me rise a second time. I am still a no on House File 639.
Chair recognizes the senator from Blackhawk, Senator Dotzler.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I say hogwash to all that. You had an opportunity to fix this thing and make it clean with no problems. You had a chance today, and the majority of the majority party didn't do it. So don't try to claim that, it's a big problem because of this and that. Let's get right down to it. You care more about somebody taking somebody's property than you do the owners. That's what it's all about. And I've heard we've been playing games over here. Bull, road apples, sticking in farm terms. You think anybody up there aren't concerned about the crops they have? They're here because somebody with big pockets are taking their ground, to the rights that they have to their ground. And we are united in it. You heard from your own members, you heard from us, you heard from Senator Zimmer, who understands the importance of agriculture. But there's one thing that you're ignoring: our constitutional rights. So don't pontificate to me. When that vote comes up, we'll see where you're at.
Chair recognizes the senator from Webster, Senator Kreinbrink.
Thank you, Madam President. It's been a really interesting debate. I'm kind of with Senator Clemish. I've never said that I've been against property owner rights. My wife has several pipelines actually going through her land that she owns. And she made the decision to negotiate and made the decision to allow those pipelines to continue. But I think we're missing the point here. The point is the crappy bill that we're going to be voting on here in a little bit. We know it's crappy because in caucus, once we pointed out all the poor parts of that bill, our 12 came to us and wanted to switch to 943. When they had written the letter that they would only want a clean 639. Then we found out today it was crappy because even the Democrats can't stomach that bill, and they came up with the same amendment. They won't want to get blamed for this. They don't want to get blamed for shutting down all economic growth in the state of Iowa. This isn't about the Summit pipeline. This is everything. It's everything. It's labor. Your buddies, labor, were up there. They're not happy with you. You know they're not. Don't try to fake like they are. That's jobs. We're not talking about the Summit Pipeline. We're talking about jobs in all the other facets that this bill stops or slows down what's happening in the state of Iowa. I feel it. And there should have been a lot of different things that happened in the process. And I think Senator Walz was right. They probably are sorry for the way they handled themselves in some of the stuff that happened. But where are the property rights of the people that want it? Where's the property rights of the people that want that pipeline through their land? There are people. Over 70% of the people in my district have voluntarily signed up. So if that many people have signed up, that means there must be people that want this pipeline coming through their land. It's easy for me to stand on the sidelines and say I don't like it, because number one, I didn't get money. Two, I might live in town, so eminent domain means to me at a four-way stop, there's 4 houses, and they're gonna put a roundabout in just for aesthetics, and I have to give up my house. That's what eminent domain means to someone that lives in an urban area. They don't know what eminent domain means when a pipeline comes through. So you're asking people that have no clue of what eminent domain means in a farm. So like Senator Clemmich said, I'm not against property owner rights. I think it's very important that we have property owner rights. But the horse is out of the barn on this one. We know that the permits have been given for stage 1. Contracts have been entered into. These people have the money. They spent the money on kids' college, or they paid off their house, or they bought additional land next to them. So they expanded their farm. And they did this because they wanted to do this. So they have rights too. And I think we forget about the people that want this to happen and have voluntarily signed up. Honestly, what we need is we need to widen those corridors so that they can go wherever they need to go to get voluntary easements, and then you're not hurting anybody's property rights, because those people have rights to take the pipeline if they want the pipeline. Now, we're hindering their rights. We're not gonna let them do it because we're gonna stop the project. That was the goal of this, to stop the project. And you know, the amendment that we offered today, that did expand to 10 miles, 5 miles on each side of the original line. I don't know if you read that, Senator Zimmer, but it was in there. Same thing you said, we could solve the problem, and you voted against it. But it's easy now to come back and brag about widening it, isn't it?
Stage point.
I'm sorry, I won't go there again. But I just want to say that, you know, I think there was a good faith effort, and I feel sorry for the 12 that got themselves in this bind, because I think they honestly wanted 943, otherwise they wouldn't have came and offered it to us, but they were so dug in, and they were promised all these people that it was going to be a clean bill. And they actually wanted to make it better. I think they do. I think they want it better. But now we're stuck with this pile of crap. And it's gonna cost Iowa, not in the lawsuit maybe, but it's gonna cost us an economic growth. The thing that the Senator from Waterloo loves economic growth. He does, I know he does. He's passionate about it. He loves the growth of Iowa. And I do too. I'm with him on that. But I think if we vote for this bill, we're gonna stifle the growth of Iowa. We can do better than this. And I will be voting against House File 639, and I would ask my colleagues to join me.
Chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Paciniano.
Thank you, Madam President. I've heard it all today and tonight, and what we're getting is all this wisdom from the majority party, telling everybody what's wrong with the bill, what's wrong with our process, what's wrong with the Democrats. Where have you been? This bill didn't start a week ago, like most bills that come through this chamber that nobody gets a chance to really look at. We've had years. But I'm listening tonight to all this genius in this room. Senator Cranbrink, I don't think you need to inform us about labor. We have our relationship with labor, just like you do with business and industry. We want good jobs. But you know, every time we try to get something for labor, you all oppose it. Okay? You talk about our sincerity a number of times, not just tonight. That Bisignano's not sincere, that the Democrats aren't sincere, that if they were, they'd be at the interveners press conference that we were never invited to. I question your sincerity because you can give a damn about labor. You've never cast a friendly vote that gave the labor workers of this state a break. You stripped public employees of everything they had. Those of you that were here. I've been involved in this for 3 years or better. That's my sincerity. I talk to people in this Capitol. I ask them why they're here and what's the problem. And I gotta admit, I'm probably the dumbest guy in the room. But I took time to get to know them as people. I have empathy. And so this bill, regardless of how bad you think it is, I don't see one you drafted and put forward. So when we start criticizing people who dug the ditch because they didn't dig it right, look at your clean hands. You didn't help. We're trying. You know, it might seem odd to you that we're out there and we're supporting an agricultural issue today, but you know, eminent domain works for all Iowans. We're all subject to the Constitution. We all have the same rights. Stifling growth? I couldn't pick a General Assembly that's done more to stifle the growth in this state than you all. Half the people you don't like, and you scared them out of here. But the question, the motives of the people that have tried to solve any part of this problem didn't include you, or you, or you. My colleagues did. I can tell you, there's something seriously wrong with this place. This isn't government. This isn't democracy. No one over there ever asked for our opinion, because you don't need it. Well, I think you do. I really think you do need input. You're not always right. The 34-16 vote constantly that we see here, whether it's this bill or any bill, you don't need us, so you don't offer anything for our input. And that's maybe why we come back with an imperfect bill, Senator. Because you leave 16 people over here in the dark, ignored, question their loyalty. Instead of questioning their knowledge, you question our motives. I've had enough of that. We're past session. Senators, past session. Where were you in January and February, March, April? And we're now into May, and now you're telling us how dumb we all are we didn't pass a good bill, or aren't passing a good bill. Maybe it won't pass. I don't know. I don't know who to trust over there. I read things in the paper, what some of you say, and then I watch you turn around and do the opposite. Who has integrity? Who's disingenuous? I know. I know what you said. Now I watch what you've done. No surprise. I'm not surprised at all. Because most of that caucus doesn't even get to think on their own and vote on their own. They're told how to vote. So when it comes time with a bill like this that could be built bipartisan, you have no skills. You don't know how to do it. I do. I showed you. Problem is, you got to trust everybody. And it doesn't always work. But bipartisanship makes for a better Iowa. You've never accepted it. You've never offered the branch to join us and give us your knowledge. It's always just squash them. It's a Democratic idea. So we're here. We're here for this bill. Might not be a good bill, but I don't remember you writing anything. Or you five that are talking to yourselves over there in the corner. That's the kind of respect we get. That's the kind of offers we get. You don't matter. So why listen? Why bother? Well, you know, we represent the same number of people as you do. Are my people less than yours? Do they deserve less respect? Do they deserve not to be listened to for their grievances? I think not. But I understand how this business works. I understand the majority's power. And I understand you got a budget to deliver, and you own the House, you own the governorship, and we're still here. Why? Why? Why are we still here doing a bill on the pipeline with I don't know how many budget bills waiting to be debated? May 12th? And you own everything? I served here when we had split chambers. Yes, that's tough negotiations. You can't get along with each other. But yet you like to blame the Democrats. We're just sitting here waiting for you. You killed the budget sub, which ruined everybody's opportunity to learn about our budget. We see it at the 11th hour. We did the best we could with the opposition against us. And believe me, those people have suffered stress, financial loss because they had to hire attorneys to protect their property, which the Constitution already does. But no, they've had to go get the private sector to protect them against the private sector. And we allow it. And we allow it. I thought you took an oath. We all did. Not only to uphold the Constitution, when you took your job, you offered to represent people like the people that are sitting up there in the gallery. If I represented my district like those people get represented, they don't have any representation. So I asked my colleagues to do the right thing. What you're advocating against, those people up there who are your constituents, because you were told to. You were persuaded, not on fact. We know that. Come on, we weren't born last night. So I ask all my colleagues in this room to vote for this bill in spite of you and whatever effort you put in other than trying to kill it all year and last year and the year before. We've had enough of that. We stepped up. I stepped up. I called you out because it's time you've been called out. It's time your constituents see you for who you are. And you represent big business and not the working people, whether it's the laborers or the farmers. Shame on you. I ask my colleagues to vote House File 639 yes.
Chair recognizes the senator from Delaware, Senator Zumba.
Thank you, Madam President. Growing up, when a complicated situation happened at my home, silence from my father was the deadliest weapon that I ever experienced. But it was vividly clear what that silence meant. And I've heard folks in this room talk several times about, for 4 years, there was silence. That silence meant that legislation was not acceptable. Quite often that silence speaks a lot more than pages and pages of words. This year we had a couple of folks in this room that drilled down through every single word, paragraph, phrase, innuendo that was in that bill. And he explained it to us. Every single word. Not that what some group told us it meant, not the pro-pipeline people, not the anti-pipeline people, but what the language actually says. Not many people in this room did that. Not very many at all did that. Every single phrase, what every single word meant. It all sounded good if you didn't read it word for word. It all looked pretty good. Sounded like, boy, this is all about property rights. It's all about the Constitution. Those are the two words we keep hearing over and over again. But was it? It was not. In fact, as we drilled down through the actual words, we found out this bill had nothing to do about property rights. Senator from the Ankeny area, he gave the opportunity, every one of us, all 50 of us, he gave us the opportunity to actually pass bills to improve property rights. There's nothing. There is years of legal activity in this state that says that was in those words were constitutional. That argument is not valid. It's opinion. You can have a fair opinion, but it is not part of this bill. The constitutionality is not an accurate statement. We are asked in this chamber to pass state policy. Not policy for our individual cities, not policies for our individual counties, but statewide policy that passes constitutionality. I don't think there's a bill that did that better than the one that the senator from Ankeny offered. Clearly, it was about property rights, that amendment. This bill is about one thing. When you drill down through and listen to every word, you read it word for word, like I know that senator did, every word, and you explained us all to it. It was nothing about property rights. It was about killing a project. And it took us all a while to drill down through all those words, the pages and pages and pages of documents, to figure out what it really, really said. I'm not running for higher office. I'm not trying to get time on the floor where I can say all the wonderful, great things so I get a little bit of press time. I'm not doing that. But I am trying to ensure statewide policy in this state is what we actually say it is. This bill is about killing a project, not about constitutionality, not about property rights. We missed that boat, folks. Had it laid out there in front of us, and we were too stubborn to listen to the actual words. Almost 13 years worth of experience at this desk, and I've never, ever witnessed a situation like this, where emotions got ahead of reality, anchoring into a corner, and now too afraid to come out of it, too afraid to face the consequences of signing on to something that was horrible. Some naive, some inexperienced, some just bad judgment. And now we're put in a situation to possibly pass horrible statewide legislation. Where's the joy in the room, folks? Nobody's smiling. Look at each other. Look to your left, look to your right. Everybody's sitting here just frustrated as could be that we have a horrible piece of legislation in front of us, and we don't know what to do with it. And some are so naive, they don't even see it. There's a lot of good things that have happened in this room historically. And we have an opportunity to do something good or do something bad. I hope when you vote on this, you really, truly understand the pages and pages of words that you're voting on and know what you're doing to the state. Fall corn's under $4. Break even's right at $5. Billions of bushels. It's simple math. Just take $1 a bushel. Backwards. We're all about emerging markets. Let's kill that with this bill. It's not about constitutionality. That's already been proven. It's been proven in the courts. It's been proven in past legislation. That's just a rhetoric. It's a rhetoric. It's an opinion. We're all welcome to our opinions. It's not accurate. We have a chance to do what's right here. It's time to put this piece of legislation to bed. Take a look at what the senator from Ankeny offered that's truly about property rights. Give the opportunity to never have to use eminent domain again on project. That opportunity was offered. So we have constitutionality with the absence of eminent domain and improved property rights. That's a win-win-win for Democrats and Republicans. That's a win-win-win. Was 50, now I think there's 49 people in here can get 3 wins and all brag back to their constituents back home. I improved property rights, I eliminated the use of eminent domain, and I did it with constitutionality. Win, win, win. Senator, take it home with you. Everybody on the left side of the room, take that home with you. A win, win, win. Go win elections with that. Senators on the right side, go home with that. Win, win, win. Property rights, constitutionality, and getting rid of the use of eminent domain. It was all right there, Senator from Ankeny. You had it. You had it. Senator from Spillville, thank you for drilling down to every single word in this bill and explaining it to us word for word, word. Thank you for asking the questions that many couldn't answer. Question after question after question after question. They couldn't answer them. That was shameful. To promote a bill you can't even answer the questions to. I hope these moments of silence make us all think. And whether you're sitting in these chairs or sitting in the chamber up above, we need to have 3 wins. We need to find a way to get back to that. But we need to put this piece of legislation to bed where it's been, where that silence was speaking loudly. Madam President, I ask for a no vote on this piece of legislation that we put it to bed. Thank you, Madam President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Blackhawk, Senator Sires.
Thank you, Madam President. Do you hear the people singing a song of angry men? It is the music of a people. These words, made famous on stage, echo far beyond the theater. Today, they echo through the halls of this Capitol. For 4 legislative sessions, Iowans have come here, not in anger, but in resolve. They came to remind us, this government, of a simple truth. It exists to serve the people, not the other way around. Somewhere along the way, in the bureaucratic fog of pipeline routes, regulatory filings, and carbon capture debates, we lost sight of what's really at stake. This fight isn't about utilities, it's about liberty. It's not about gas lines, water pipes, transmission systems. It's about property rights and the rightful constitutional limits on the use of eminent domain. Iowans know the difference between public use and private gain. We support infrastructure that keeps the lights on, heats our homes, delivers clean water to our communities. That's a public good. But a pipeline that bypasses our homes offers no service to our communities and enriches a private company at the expense of farmers' land. That is not public infrastructure, that's private intrusion. And when governmental power is used to take land for private profit, that's not progress, it's abuse. Over 2 centuries ago, James Madison warned us of this danger. In his 1792 essay on the meaning of property, he wrote, "In a word, as a man is said to have a right to his property, he may be equally said to have a property in his rights." That is the foundation of any free government, not just defending what people own, but defending their very right to own it. Iowans are patient and respectful people. We follow the law, we honor our institutions, and that respect must be mutual. It is time for this legislature to show the same respect to the people of Iowa, the same deference to their rights, and same courage that they've shown by returning to this building year after year. Madam President, I urge every one of my colleagues to stand up, not just for House File 639, but for the principles that brought us here. Stand for liberty, stand for justice, stand for the Iowans who refuse to be silenced. Let's do the right thing. Thank you, Madam President.
Seeing no further senators seek the floor, the chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Buslow, for final comments on House File 639.
Thank you, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate. First of all, I want to thank the folks in the gallery, farmers, landowners, interested parties, for their patience, for their engagement, even for their small kindnesses. As most of you know, I gave up sweets at the Capitol because that's about all there is to eat at the Capitol during the heat of the legislative session. And some of the folks that are ideologically not with me on my amendment were kind enough to start bringing carrots and vegetables and subjecting, probably taking a lot home because I don't think many of my colleagues, as I look around the room, were engaging in eating those carrots and celery sticks. But I want to say thank you. It didn't go unnoticed, and it's a small kindness that I think exemplifies the kindness of Iowans to disagree without being disagreeable. And tonight has been fun in a weird way of what fun is. And I think that the senators on both sides can agree that there's been a fair amount of pontificating by both sides. It's the nature of the Senate to a degree. And I'm going to do my best not to pontificate, maybe despite my reputation or in spite of my reputation. And instead focus my remarks on the bill itself, which at this point seems a little novel. In this business and in this legislature and in life, I think we all try and avoid unintended consequences. And my fear for what the bill is before us is not the unintended consequences, it's the ones that I believe are intended. As I mentioned earlier tonight, or today, I've sort of lost track of what time and remarks were made. I believe that House File 639 is a Trojan horse. There's a horse rolled into the legislature, a horse rolled in and passed into the Senate with the armor and the look to kill one project. But as I mentioned earlier, it's the soldiers that are contained within that I worry about for our state. The change to definitions, to change a definition of a commodity beyond what Merriam-Webster would even envision, that limit the development and building out of our infrastructure, allowing out-of-state extremists the opportunity to sue on every type of project from a water main to a transmission line to a natural gas plant to a coal-powered plant to an oil pipeline, to an ammonia pipeline, to a hydrogen pipeline, to a CO2 pipeline, and then apply brand new legal standards never envisioned and that are unequal in their distribution to those very projects that most favor the environmental and out-of-state extremists that are suing to end the growth in Iowa. And we know that those are intended consequences because of the stated mission of the very people who authored the bill. In fact, one of the stated missions of the Sierra Club is to end the use of internal combustion engines by 2035. They stated that. They put it out there, not me. And Senator Zimmer was right. Put that on tape. And I'd like to remind my friend, who's often confused for my older brother from a different side of the aisle, Senator Bisignano, that I did have an amendment that was defeated that could have protected landowners, would have protected landowners, avoided eminent domain for CO2 pipelines, protected our infrastructure against out-of-state interests and out-of-state extremists. But I would also remind Senator Zimmer that it wasn't the amendment that was defeated, that or it was the amendment that was defeated, but not the amendment that was non-germaned and not voted on. And it was an amendment, I might remind ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, that expanded on an amendment that passed the Senate Commerce Committee unanimously on a bipartisan basis. So there was a bipartisan solution that we had, and in fact, that had passed bipartisan. And it was foregone for an opportunity to kill infrastructure of all kinds. We need to realize that infrastructure in our state, in fact, nearly all infrastructure in our state and across the country, is built by private companies. And that in Iowa, those private companies building that infrastructure create thousands of jobs. And that we have a process. In fact, that process is being followed. And that, right or wrong, the constitutionality is decided by the Supreme Court. That's the process outlined in the Iowa Constitution and the United States Constitution. But the reason that this is going back and looking retroactively at phase one, I believe, is because there's a fear that that constitutionality is going to be found to be constitutional. That folks are afraid that they are going to lose at the Iowa Supreme Court, and so they need to go backwards. They need to retroactively invalidate contracts and subject this state to a different constitutional challenge, Article 1, Section 10, the Contracts Clause. But in the cloak of killing one project. All the intended consequences have been acknowledged by both sides. Constitutional concerns about the Contracts Clause and what that liability might be thrown by the wayside. All 50 folks in this chamber tonight will walk out saying they voted to protect private property rights because all of them did. If you voted for the amendment, you voted to protect private property rights, you voted to expand private property rights. If you vote for this bill tonight, same people will say the same things. So I ask, acknowledging all of those intended consequences on the development of infrastructure of all kinds because of how this bill applies, the jobs that are relied upon to build that infrastructure, and our agricultural industry, who is facing headwinds, as Senator Zumbaugh talked about, who, as we know, for the first time ever, Brazil will produce more corn, more soybeans than the United States. We will never again be the low-cost producer of grain in the world. And Iowa has always rallied around how we find new markets for our agricultural commodities. Iowa has always rallied around what we can do to add value to those commodities that we produce here. It's produced wonderful innovations that have spurred the growth of our state, which we are a growing state, as opposed to Minnesota. Price keeps going down. Illinois. So what's the plan? If this becomes law, what is the plan. I've worked, it's my first year as Senate Commerce Chair. I'm still kind of new here. And I moved a bill out. Moved a bill out without a strike after because I wanted to work earnestly to get something done. I offered an amendment that I was proud to put my name on. And I'll stand here tonight, having worked with folks on all sides, knowing that I worked with integrity and honesty on an amendment and throughout this process to protect and expand private property rights in a way that has never been seen, in a way that if it was today defeated common sense proposals that all have talked about saying that they made sense. On an amendment that would have ended eminent domain on CO2 pipelines going forward, allowed to avoid eminent domain. It didn't pass. It's the business we're in. But I fear for the intended consequences of this bill. And I fear that I hope we have a plan. I hope we have a plan for infrastructure to grow our state, for the jobs that are going to be harder to build it, for the farmers that produce the wealth and the great crops and commodities that we rely on. This has been fun, but as my mom used to say, this was a lot of fun, let's never do it again. We have a lot of work to do, Madam President. So with that, I move that House File 639 be read for the final time and placed on its passage.
The senator from Polk moves House File 639 be read for the final time and placed on its passage. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The motion prevails. The secretary will read.
House File 639, a bill for implementing hazardous liquid pipelines, including common carrier requirements, proceedings on the Iowa Utilities Commission, including commission member attendance, hearings, and informational meetings, including allowing certain persons to intervene in such proceedings, including sanctions on interveners in contested cases, permit renewal, operation limitation, including effective date and applicable provisions being enacted by General Assembly State of Iowa.
The senator from Polk moves that the reading thus far be considered the last reading of the bill. Those in favor of the motion vote aye. Aye. Opposed vote nay. Oh, I guess we don't need to do that. Motion prevails. Is the title agreed to? The title is agreed to. The question now is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of the passage of House File 639 will vote aye. Opposed will vote nay. The secretary will open the voting system and receive your vote. Senator Whitver votes nay. Senator Bennett votes aye. Senator Donahue votes aye. Senator Cornbach votes aye. Rule 23 has been called. The secretary will call the roll.
Senator Garrett. He's trying to vote. Senator Weiner.
Has every senator voted? Every senator has voted. The secretary will close the voting system. The secretary will lock the voting system and record your vote. The Senate will pay attention to the results of the roll call. Those voting aye, 27. Those voting nay, 22. The bill, having received a constitutional majority, is declared to have passed the Senate, and the title was agreed to. Chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Whitver.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent to immediate message House File 639.
The senator from Polk, Senator Whitver, asks unanimous consent to immediately message House File 639. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Senator Whitver, you're in order.
Thank you, Madam President. I call up the following bills in the following order. Senate File 647 with Senator Green. Senate File 646 with Senator Shipley.
Senator from Polk, Senator Whitver, calls up Senate File 647 and Senate File 646. The chair recognizes the senator